Today is the 11th of February 2025 and you're very welcome to AI Experts. Welcome to AI Experts. I'm Ken Joyce. I'm delighted to say that we are joined in studio this morning by Martin Graham. Martin is Head of AI for... Over to you, Martin. Give your own spiel there. Tell us all about how wonderful you are.
Thanks, Ken. So currently I work as the Director of Customer AI for Liberty Global. So Liberty Global is a telecoms conglomerate, so a US company that owns telecoms businesses, predominantly in Europe. So in Ireland, what people be most familiar with would be Virgin Media. So that's our business here. So the telecoms business, obviously, in Virgin Media Television as well. So I've been working within that organisation broadly for about the last 6.5 years or so. First 5 of them, 5.5 in Virgin Media, and now with the parent company. So
I heard about you originally in fintech. I thought, were you Deutsche Bank and
so down the years I've worked in financial services, so in retail banking with Permanent TSB here in Ireland. Previously in corporate banking for Deutsche Bank for a few years in their data and AI lab, which was based in Dublin at the time. Prior to that, I spent several years working in mobile telecoms with O2 here in Ireland as well, and even going back further with America Online, right back into the 90s. So
AOL, my goodness,
AOL,
haven't heard of that for a while.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting one because when I often speak to groups of students, and that because I do a bit of work with TU Dublin as well.
You lecture there, do you?
I do, yeah. Now as a guest lecturer, so 3 or 4 times a year, they'll invite me in to speak to a class about.
But they don't invite Egypts to do things like that now. Let's face it.
They don't, I guess. And the fact that they've been asking me to come back for the last 8 years or so, I presume I must be saying something useful to the students. But yeah, it's always interesting to see the reactions of a 22 or a 25-year-old to AOL. They're rarely aware of what it is, and when we think about the behemoth that it was, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it's I suppose it's a marker of how these industries are constantly changing. As technology changes, organizations kind of come and go.
So is your background then predominantly computer science or marketing?
Well, it's a combination, actually. So I'd say the way that I would describe myself, I suppose, is I've been working in the world of data analytics, AI. We kind of retrospectively apply the words AI now to a lot of that data analytics work. Probably throughout my career, that's been the constant. The areas that I've applied it to through that time have varied from, an operations focus, say within AOL, very much a marketing focus in O2 and Permanent TSB. Deutsche Bank's major challenges from a data point of view were largely around compliance with regulatory obligations that they would have had, and now there's probably a stronger focus in Virgin on the marketing again, but very much in the world now of customer operations too. So
tell me the difference between data analytics and AI.
I would say that's a fairly fuzzy line now. If I were to roll back my own career to the early 2000s, when I would have had my first pieces of work, hands-on pieces of work that I would have done in AOL, in what we would now call AI, that term was probably very far away from what we would have described the work as. So we had different names for data mining, data analytics, advanced analytics, predictive analytics, but would now very much fall under the definition of AI as it would be put forward, right, as kind of machine learning and computers, I suppose, being able to carry out tasks.
But was there machine learning involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in that time, again, we didn't use the term machine learning.
So what was it called then?
Data mining was probably the kind of...
Data mining was examining databases for information and stuff,
correct.
Wasn't it? If I understood it correctly.
And being able to surface insights from them in a programmatic way, right? So if we think about those examples, like the really kind of predominant ones would be in the predictive analytics field. Where you could be creating a model that would, in that instance, would determine the likelihood of a customer to pay their bill or not, in order to inform operations. The best way to deal with that customer. The same technique would be applied to trying to cross sell a new product in marketing, or trying to retain a customer in customer operations. It would result in a machine learning model, but as I say, like we didn't necessarily use that language in industry.
So you've touched on a couple of things there. So. The first is credit control, and the second is CRM, customer relationship management.
Yeah.
And you were using computer science, aka artificial intelligence nowadays in the form of data mining a decade ago.
2 decades ago.
2 decades
Yeah, more
ago.
than, yes. Yeah, yeah.
Tell me about how you'd use it today.
So today, I guess, like, for me, this comes back to, like, there are so many different applications within a business. You know, as I said, whether it's about being able to grow revenue, retain customers, find new customers, develop market segmentations, and so on. It's something that genuinely, you know, when you think about when you ask, like, what field does somebody who does what I do work in, it's really about being able to apply the skills to a whole, like, range of different business problems, and it nails down into, like, what does that specific organization really need to achieve in that time frame. So you'll have organizations who focuses very much on, like, in the telecoms industry, for example, like, customer retention is a huge part of what every telecoms business tries to do, right? There are very few homes in Ireland left that don't have a broadband service. You know, the competition that's there for new customers, to win customers over from another provider is, like, cutthroat is probably the best way that I could describe it. Like, the depth of discounting that's available. You'll have seen those offers, new customers only, attached to the end of thing. So for any business who has a large customer base, being able to hang on to the ones that they have at the value that they have them at is a really significant challenge. So that there's a very broad range of places that we could apply it.
So the cost of getting a customer in the first place presumably is a lot more than the cost of retaining them, and yet, you know, the area that you've just mentioned there, the mobile phone industry and the broadband, it would seem to me that there is all of the effort goes into the acquiring of the client, and there is zero effort made in retaining the clients. From personal experience and my friends, they say that when, you know, you sign up and once your 6 months is up, you just can't talk to anybody on the phone, you can't get any. Will AI help you address that?
Absolutely, but selectively, right? So if I come at it from a very commercial standpoint, so there's always a balance between, do we want to come at this from a commercial standpoint? Do we want to come at it from a customer experience, customer satisfaction standpoint? But if I come at it from a commercial point of view, the biggest thing that it's going to help me to do is identify the people where I have to make that investment and where that investment is going to be most valuable, right? So to be able to apply the machine learning techniques in order to, for example, segment your existing customer base into groups of people who are more truly valuable, which is not necessarily the person who pays you the most amount of money, and those people who are most likely to or most exposed to leaving or new offers from competitors as they arrive at the end of a contractual period, it allows you to be selective as to where you place that investment. So your personal experience may be that you very rarely had that investment made, right? No judgment whatsoever, Ken, but it's very likely that whatever telecoms provider you're using has a team of people in the background deciding exactly how much they think they're willing to invest in that relationship. And if I was to give you the example, my own personal experience example, I would go straight to insurance, right? So I'm the type of person who has a very consistent habit with my car insurance. I'll get to month 11, I received a notice, I think, oh, I better shop around. I'll go and get 10 quotes online, think about it for a little while, and the next notification that I will get will tell me that my insurance expired yesterday, and I'll have to phone my existing provider really quickly to go, oh, I got a better offer from somewhere else. And my pattern of behaviour, I would expect at this stage, has been ingrained deeply enough that they will say, we can't give you a discount, because they know I'm going to sign up to
They can see you coming.
They can see me coming, exactly, right? And they've seen that pattern of behaviour. So I'm very much the customer in the insurance world that gets no offer, but I'm pretty confident that's I've created that problem for myself, and I'm going to have to switch if I ever want to get out of that segment.
Which, of course, is not in the insurance company's interests.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
So in many respects, then, the research that they're doing is actually detrimental to their cause.
It depends, right? I mean, they play with all of these models, right? We work in a world of probability, right? And we rely on large numbers to do it. So in any individual case, that may well be true, right? So ultimately, at some point, the likelihood is that I will move away from them. I will eventually make that phone call in time to another provider and not have to renew in a panic. But they're relying on the fact that there are 10,000 other people very similar to me, and you know that 90% or whatever probability they'd put on that those people will stay. They'll have done the maths in the background to decide exactly, therefore, what it's worth for them to invest in the 10,000 to make that a profitable decision for them. But when you examine the individual, yeah, absolutely, you'll find that there are cases that just look completely counterintuitive.
But you put your finger on something interesting there as well, Martin. 90,000 people just like me, and the law of big numbers and things like that. one of the great criticisms people have of customer service today is that it's totally impersonal.
Mm-hmm.
Is AI going to make that even worse?
Both yes and no, right? Because I think when we use the term AI in that case, again, it's so broad that there are places where effectively it will make that a more depersonalized experience, right? Because you are, we often talk in businesses about kind of trying to create the segment of one, but in reality, what that actually means is we're creating significant segments that on an individual level maybe feel like one, but they're really made up of large groups of people. Because if you ever got down to one, all of the probabilities can no longer be applied, right? So it has to be done at that large number scale. Where I think the counter argument, I suppose, that can be applied to that now, where things can genuinely become more personalised, is a little bit more in the communications, the offers. Because as we have done things in the past, we've needed human beings to decide what is the specific thing and the way that we're going to make that offer to this person, right? So if you have a contact centre, for example, that's receiving 500,000 calls a day, you're going to end up in a situation where you've got pretty prescribed scripts that you need your agents to follow, and particularly in the financial services world, right? Because you'd be very, very careful about, compliance with regulatory obligations. Where what the creative side, I suppose, that's emerging now within the AI world will allow us to do is actually to have, a much more personalised, both specific offer and the way that offer is actually presented to the customer in a way that's really matched to something that they may need. Comes back to the availability and the collection of data to make sure that you are actually able to deal with the individual as opposed to the mass segment.
People and AI and the relationship between the two ever changing, and the analytics that AI is able to make to create what you've just termed as a segment of one. Is that going to change the fundamental reaction and philosophy of the very audience it's researching?
It depends. So my view of this would be it depends, right? And it depends a little bit on where the public perception of the entire thing goes, right? I think this almost comes back for me into a psychology space. I've also a background in consumer research for my for my sins, and the psychology of this I think is really interesting. Most of us, and you'll have read, Daniel Kahneman and other people who from the field of behavioral economics, and they'll tell you that most of us go through our lives thinking that we make a very large number of decisions every day, but in reality we don't, right? We've the same, very similar heuristics and algorithms inside our heads that drive our decision making based on previous experience, and quite often you need something to actually happen to break you out of that cycle. So people right now have a very high awareness of AI because there's been a very public discourse around that world. They're very unaware of the amount of AI that's been built into their lives for the last 10 years, right? Into the. But
that would have been more narrow AI, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so I suppose if the question leans towards will the introduction of generative AI into content creation, video and so on, it certainly creates the possibility for a much more personalized view. Like it certainly within the realms of possibility that you would have at some point a show created on Netflix that's specifically for you, right? I'm thinking about Black Mirror episodes now in the back of my mind, but that's certainly not something that I couldn't imagine happening in the future.
Doesn't sound great for the Virgin Media business, does it?
Well, the content creation side of the world. Well, again, if again you come at it from what's the if the purpose is commercial. I think I could definitely find a story in there that would be very positive for content distribution and ownership, right? Because, the more personalized you can create that content for the individual, assuming that it's compelling, the stronger the attachment you're going to have to their viewing, right? Which will become very attractive to advertisers. If you look at it from a creative perspective and you think about, art. It calls into serious question of like, could you ever describe something that was created by a computer as art, right? And what does that do from a societal point of view? I think that's a very different, coming at the question from a very, very different angle.
Well, let's take a look from that angle though, because if we have a world where AI is creating art, for want of a better description, what it's really doing is scraping existing art and taking bits from everything and mixing it together according to an algorithm.
Yeah.
So it's not actually creating anything new.
That's very true, and I think I would take a view that a lot of what we do, in fact, like I'd nearly go so far sometimes to say as everything when it comes to that data analytics world, leaning into AI, right? It is absolutely taking things that existed before, combining them in a different way in order to create something that looks new, but it's actually made up of the constituent parts of something that happened previously.
But that's also the case with music. I mean, the 12 notes in an octave have always been there, but yet we create new songs every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I only yesterday was reading. I'm gonna blank on whose song it was, but that Radiohead had to credit a couple of songwriters on the song "Creep." Because it was too similar to a song that had been previously released maybe 20 years earlier. I just cannot remember the name of the band that took them to court in order for that to be the case, right? But I think, I mean, and similarly with art, like it's a philosophical question, but where do you draw the line, right? If I have a palette of colours that I can combine in any in any combination, is there ever anything new that's created? And I suppose the art then only exists in the finished product, which is a unique thing. So if I follow my own thread, I'm almost starting to get to the point where I would argue that AI can create art.
It does create something new, but the same way as we create a new song. Absolutely fascinating. The question, I suppose, on a lot of people's minds, you said earlier on that people have this perception of AI. What do you read that as? What do you feel that is now from a commercial perspective?
So I suppose if we just look at the conversation that takes place, and I think about the conversations that I'd have with friends and
non-technical
colleagues,
people not in the space,
people who don't live in this world, I think there's the hype that has been driven, I suppose, or the exposure, let's say, of the things that are possible to the broader public through, ChatGPT obviously being the first thing that kind of triggered off the current wave. I do think there's a strong misconception about what it's actually doing, and the fact that it's able to behave quite similar to, conversationally quite similar to the way that a human being would converse with you. People will naturally, and again it's a psychology thing, they'll naturally start to ascribe human qualities to something, right? So very interesting behavioral pieces. If you observe people using tools like Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT, they'll very often put the word please at the end of a sentence, right? Which is completely redundant, right? But yet it's part
from a prompt engineering point of view, it is, but as you mentioned earlier, we are effectively, the machines are learning. So is it not good to teach them manners?
Yeah, I mean, and like, look, they have. Look, to be fair, I have found most of them to be very, very polite. I nearly err on the side of being overly polite, right? Because like I do see that as being part of the drawing of people into the idea that the thing that they're communicating is like has a human quality, right? Which makes people much more comfortable with it. Absolutely, right? So it's a very good device. But I think the like as the kind of this becomes more and more prevalent, and when we look at the regulatory frameworks that the EU is placing out, like, and they're very, very strong on.
But only the EU so far.
So far, yeah, they're very, very strong on. You have to be very clear with a person that they're conversing with something that isn't a human being, right? Very different, you're right, in other parts of the world, where we see a much looser, let's say, approach to the regulatory thing, where it's a little bit more, let's see where this takes us. Let's really try and accelerate it. Let's see what the possibilities are, and then maybe we'll start to try to rein things in a little bit later on. But
so we'll let the horse out and then we close the gate afterwards.
It's a little bit like that. Yeah. Like, I mean, I think there'll be people trying to squeeze toothpaste back into tubes in a lot of countries in a number of years through retrospective regulation. Now, I think it's very the European Commission could be criticised for taking some pretty blunt approaches to these things on a side. So I think there's very strong arguments in both directions.
One of the things that fascinates most people about artificial intelligence is how it will impact on the future. Could you talk to us about two things? Firstly, when we're signing up for all these free things that AI is offering us, they say that anything free means you're the product, right? Mm-hmm. Should we be signing up? Like the DeepSeek, for instance, recently out of China, it pretty much says in the terms and conditions that if you sign up for this, you're giving us the right to use all of your information for marketing purposes, which basically means we're going to psychologically analyze you digitally and create a digital avatar of your strengths and weaknesses, which we will use psychologically to punch things to you in the future. A lot of people are a bit nervous about that.
Yeah. And I think like DeepSeek is an interesting example because it's so new. I would say, there's still a hell of a lot to learn. There's still a lot of work for people to do around, what do the security protocols look like? What's really happening underneath the hood? But if we take the question in the broader context, I think you look at companies who have pumped, billions and billions of dollars into the research and development that's needed to create these things. There's tons of industry applications for them. There's lots of ways for them to start to make money back. But it is quite difficult to see what the long-term profitable, continuous evolution of these is if you don't have a consumer, like a direct-to-consumer product that's able to make money, right? And if we look at the history of those things, I think back
the only thing is to be able to sell, the deep creep that you have achieved from your audience to Big Brother.
Yeah, and this is the thing. Like if you look at take Google is a great example, right? Like if I think back to my time in AOL, we saw Google really mushroom early and drive user numbers like incredibly, right? Because they delivered a much better search product than anybody else. But for quite a long time, the big question was, it doesn't make any money, right? How are they going to make money, right? And the answer to that was obviously advertising, right? And so when you take that business model example as the one that we have seen before go from very large user base to very profitable company, and how would that same thing be applied in the world of AI driven chatbots? It creates what honestly for me, like personally at this point, would be quite a worrying question of if the responses from one of these bots starts to include messages. So I'll give you a live example from my own life. I recently found myself a new golf coach through ChatGPT. Tom, who's the best golf coach in North Dublin, gave me a couple of responses. I researched a little bit further, picked somebody, but very much I became aware of that person because ChatGPT told me that person existed. Right now, he was amazed when I told him that this happened. Right, so hadn't any knowledge of it. But you can definitely see a world in the future where organizations or small businesses are bidding on being in that list in the same way that they bid for advertising. Or they're beginning to optimize their online presence to be there. So we think about something like SEO in the marketing world, search engine optimization. Yeah, that it's all about building your website in a specific way to rank higher in Google's placements, right? And you do that, we call it organic, but you do that like inverted commas free of charge because you're not paying Google for that ranking, right? But you're spending an awful lot of money.
But you are the product.
Exactly, right? So you're bringing that thing where the consumer is using Google for that search, and that company is essentially investing a ton of money both directly with Google for paid search and indirectly with lots of other agencies to help them do SEO in order for their product, their website, their whatever message, whatever it would be, to be in those first two or three results or ahead of them from an advertising point of view. So again, it's probably not the only model, but it's the one that we've seen before.
So might people change their online relationship with AI knowing full well that they are being analysed in that kind of way and not actually be themselves and therefore create false avatars of themselves within the algorithms?
I mean, look, and is it so? Absolutely. But is that new? So I would say, if you take a look at Instagram, take a look at TikTok, I'm pretty sure that already exists, right? And again, the eyeballs are the product, right? In those instances. So I've never gone and verified this, but if I believe the amount of money that's possible to earn on TikTok with a large following or a large number of views, it's a very lucrative thing to be able to put that persona out there. I'm sure there's some very genuine people who are reflecting their real lives, but it's an industry, right? And yeah, I can't. It's not that I can't. It's very difficult to picture a world in which that doesn't become part of the future of these kind of direct-to-consumer AI.
So what world do you picture going forward? Are we heading for dystopia or utopia?
It's and I think this is going to, in my mind, this is going to be the battle between the how much regulation do you put in or how much do you not. So if I take the example of something simple like we talked about earlier, where an organization will be selectively deciding whether to give you an additional offer to retain your business, whether it's in insurance or telecoms, if you took that into healthcare, right, and you said it's okay for an organization to selectively choose to offer you health insurance or to selectively choose to offer you a specific treatment based on all of this data that they've created for you, it's suddenly goes from feeling like, well, that's a reasonable commercial thing for a company to do, to, oh no, like I can't deny somebody healthcare based on some algorithm that says they only have a 90% chance of having this thing instead of that 100, and somebody arbitrarily somewhere has decided that's the cutoff point that we're willing to to invest in that person's health in the future.
So a good place to start studying now, if you're thinking about how to exploit the world financially in years to come, would be learn about ethics, because everybody's going to need to know that.
I think and this is absolutely the case. Like, so I think there's a field of consulting. I was asked actually. I was speaking to a group of data scientists on a couple of days ago in Dublin, and one of the questions that I was asked was, if somebody were giving you $10 million to go and start a business now around the field of AI, and you wanted to, to build that into something, what would you focus on? Right, and that was a really interesting question to get from an audience. My answer was, I would probably focus on the people impact, transformation that needs to happen within businesses, societies, systems, in order for the AI to be incorporated into it in a way that's really effective, right? And effective can mean a lot of different things. It can mean commercially effective. It can mean societally beneficial. But I do think that transformation piece, the ethics that come with it, there's going to be a lot of consultants getting very rich for the next 10 or 15 years selling that type of service. How effective they will be with actually, making it happen is a big question.
Well, especially when the product that they're studying is an ever moving feast, because yes. The Gen Z kids who are brought up with TikTok and Instagram, things that you mentioned, they have an attention span of about 5 seconds, and give them a copy of Charles Dickens and they wouldn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and I guess like you kind of, they're like, is this the world? Talk about art, right? Like, is this the world that we end up in, where if somebody has to, like, if I take the example of a Leaving Cert student, for example, now studying, pick a, like, King Lear, let's say, we pick a Shakespearean play. That was the one that was my Leaving Cert year. Do I need to read the play, or can I have an AI that summarizes the play in a way that's very specifically tailored towards sitting the Leaving Cert, and I study that, right? And what you're effectively, I suppose, doing in that instance, in my mind, is exposing the limitations of the way that we assess academics at the moment, right? So we expect to educate the student in the field of drama and literature, but then we test it through a knowledge test, essentially, right? That's a very specific, formulated type of knowledge test, where the student can pass that test by learning the knowledge without ever understanding drama or literature. So I think the education is going to be called into question enormously within this as well, and I think it's something that governments should be investing heavily in. And it brings me back to why would that be the business that I would go for? Is I would be out there lobbying governments right now to say, your education system has probably been broken for quite a while, but now it's about to be horribly exposed, or at least the way that you assess it is about to be horribly exposed, because you already have places where students are taught how to pass the exam as opposed to taught the subject, and that ability, like, we're going to put tools into both educators and students' hands that will allow them to double down on that, pass the exam, as opposed to ever learn the subject. So you say, well, what is education then? Because that small nugget of knowledge of King Lear is going to be relevant to that person in their future in very, very limited ways.
To paraphrase another Shakespearean play, to be or not to be, that is the question. Mm-hmm. Is it possible, do you think, that AI can become sentient?
Right now, I haven't seen anything that would make me concerned that AI would become sentient.
Geoffrey Hinton, former head of AI at Google, appears to differ in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think people will have opinions, right? Like, when you talk about the future and futurology, like given enough time, given enough resource, we come back to say like that all things are possible. But there's nothing, I suppose, what I'd say is like there's nothing that I've seen yet that would make me think that. I do see a lot of organizations that have very strong vested interests in painting a picture of the future in multiple different directions, to say this is something that's really different, really transformative, because it's, they've invested a huge amount of money. There's
So they have a
very
vested
large
interest in pushing that boat.
Absolutely. Now, does that mean that's what they're doing? It doesn't necessarily, but the vested interest is absolutely there, and I think the evidence is there in the impact that DeepSeek's release had on Nvidia's stock price, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that there was a huge amount of future value built into the stock price for Nvidia that DeepSeek seems to have undermined, and that value disappears very quickly. Nvidia is not the only organization that has all of that future value built in. So to continue to paint that picture of the future has to continue to be painted in order for that future value to stay in those companies' stock prices.
Paint me a picture of the future for the average mom and dad, though. Is that a future where there'll be no more cancer, our kids will be educated by a personalized education system specific to the functioning of their brain, and there will be a universal basic income, no poverty in the world, or something else?
Well, I think, like, I was going along with you up until the universal basic income and no poverty in the world. I think it's very difficult to see a future where this type of technology is controlled by corporations and the end result is an egalitarian society, right? Because again, just talking purely from without any personal view on it as such, like just basic facts, like those organizations answer to shareholders. Their directors are legally obliged to continue to try to add shareholder value. Trying to create a perfectly egalitarian future isn't in the interests of their shareholders, right? So that's not going to be the target.
But theoretically, governments don't. They answer to the people.
Correct.
Who are presumably egalitarian, using the rule of big numbers you mentioned earlier.
And this comes back to the idea of like where should regulation go and where should this sit, right? Because right now the technology, the possibilities of the future don't sit with governments, it sits with corporations. And certainly in the non-EU world, that's being doubled down on, right? Like, so in the US, like government and business are getting closer and closer together all of the time. And from what we can see so far, a lot of that is to the benefit of the corporations, right? So I think while that picture is certainly possible technologically and maybe even societally, it's not the direction that we're heading in at the moment. I do think the idea of healthcare and the ability to like find novel ways of treating diseases and so on, that is definitely going to be something that's a huge benefit to it. Again, you come back to the question of regulation, right? And how does healthcare get divided up? If it's a for-profit business, will it result in the eradication of cancer? Probably not. Will it result in the ability to cure cancer? Almost certainly, right? And so it's a question of like where do we put the power that those things sit in order? If our goal is for the betterment of society, where do you put that power?
So what you're suggesting there, if I understand correctly, Martin, is that whilst AI will give pharmaceutical companies the ability to cure cancer, it mightn't be in their interests to do it because they couldn't sell cancer drugs.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in that way, like if you pull it right back and you say these are commercial organizations and they have shareholders and they have a responsibility to their shareholders to try to create value, creating the ability to cure the disease is absolutely within their remit. And then, again, very coldly, what's the next thing that they should do is to try to sell those products, right? And in an unregulated environment at the highest price, right? So if you were an economist and you just look back and you say there's such a thing as a market clearing price, that's the price that you go for, and it's certainly not the case that every single person gets the product. Would we prefer to see a society where it is every single person gets? Of course, right? And that's where the trade between the commercial drive, I suppose, that enables the investment and the capital to be available to create these things in the first place, ultimately then has a conflict, and it's a conflict that exists in a lot of industries already, with the goal that we would like to think is the one where actually pharmaceutical companies are run by people who really care about delivering, or so with the way I would put it, we minimizing the suffering that exists in the world. Wouldn't that be a lovely purpose for a pharmaceutical company? But they are commercial organisations. That's the reality of what we have today.
But commercial organisations which can be regulated.
Which can be regulated, exactly.
So
and
therein lies the rub.
Yeah.
Back to our old pal Shakespeare.
Exactly. And regulated in the right way, they can continue to be commercial organisations while having an obligation to be able to deliver that betterment of society. Finding that balance is really difficult.
Martin, it's been absolutely fascinating listening to you. You're an absolute mine of useful information, and I'm delighted to have had you on the programme this morning. Thank you so much. Martin Graham, what a treat. From Ken Joyce, till next time on AI Experts, may your God go with you.